meet with you today. Good afternoon. And it's possible some of you are joining us from attending earlier this morning. We had a general K-3 class session. So if you missed that and you would like to get an overview, I encourage you to listen to the recording. And it's so great to be able to have an opportunity, if only just 1 hour, to help you think about how to really apply these enhanced strategies for instructional support into your classrooms and in the classrooms of those teachers that you support. So I would just quickly like to introduce myself. My name is Mamie, and I'm hoping that I have met some of you in person. I've been in Louisiana a lot. I've been with Teachstone for 7 years now, and spending a great deal of my time supporting our professional development support of interactions in the class tool in classrooms. So this is my area of passion. So I'm really happy to be able to talk with you today. And I've been supporting this pilot since the very beginning of it, coming several years ago to work with coaches in Sabine Parish, working with them throughout the year, and then doing trainings throughout Louisiana. So I'm just super, super excited to see how Louisiana is taking what has been working so well in the pre-K world, and now continuing that continuity of care, bringing class into the K-12 space to support the educators and also the children in the classroom. So I just would also like to let you know that we have the amazing Brandy Brunson on the line as well, who can answer any questions as they come up, specifically to how class is being used in Louisiana and the pilot. So Brandy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Mamie. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brandy Brunson. I do work with the Louisiana Department of Ed, particularly around early literacy and, of course, the class pilot. So thank you for joining us today. Many of you are probably teachers within the class pilot, and so we thank you so much for joining us, and definitely want you to learn more about instructional support from Mamie. She's definitely the best of the best. So we're excited about continuing our pilot next year and extend it into first and second grade classrooms. So if we have time at the end, I'll be happy to answer any questions around the pilot that you have. And if we don't, then I'll be able to give you contact information so we can get in touch afterwards. Thanks.
Thanks, Brandy. And so excited to know that I have a lot of teachers on the line as well. That's always exciting. So just so we can clear our focus, we are going to be talking about those effective interactions within the K-3 class instructional support domain. And we're going to be talking about strategies to support teachers as they increase effectiveness in their instructional support interactions. Just a very quick overview, thinking about what influences learning and where class falls into that. Of course, we all could agree that the structure, the who, the what, and the where of classrooms is incredibly important. That curriculum that you're using, the standards, the state and federal standards, all of the materials you have, your teacher training and education, those are all incredibly important in supporting the learning outcomes that we have in our classroom. We also have the process, the how curriculum is implemented, how we're having interactions with children during those learning opportunities, those relationships that we're building and maintaining in our classrooms. That's the process. And our research is showing us that both the structure and the process, of course, are very important in supporting children's learning outcomes and development. But the research shows that the structure actually flows through the process in order to really achieve those outcome supports for children. And it makes sense if you think about it, right? Because the curriculum is only as effective as the teacher implementing it. Those materials can only teach the children if the teacher is supporting the kids in utilizing those materials, right? Just having materials on the shelf doesn't increase education, but it's how the teacher supports the kids in utilizing those materials and really extending the learning opportunities in that way. And of course, the relationships, everything we do as human beings is relationship based when it comes to learning. And so it's critically important that children have strong relationships with their teachers in order to really be able to be open to learning the most from them and achieving their full potential. So the process is what we are going to be talking about today. The class measure only looks at the how. So everything we're talking about today is going to be how you choose to implement. And I like to say choose and choice and decisions, because those are all that teachers are doing, right? When they're thinking through how they choose to implement the decisions that they make for what they're going to do with students during each lesson and activity. So I'm really empowering you to think through how you're going to choose to in the moment work with children, and how you're going to plan to work with children to really increase their instructional support opportunities. And of course, everything we do in class that the process is really focusing on is supporting children's academic needs and cognitive needs, but as well as their social and emotional needs. All of those work together. So the K-3 class tool is really looking at how children are connecting to their teacher, and how teachers are supporting that connection and promoting that connection, self-regulated learning and self-regulation for behavior, interesting and engaging activities to really hook the children in and get them involved so they can be active participants in their learning, and development of those metacognitive thinking skills that's so critical for lifelong learners. We have 3 domains: emotional support, classroom organization, and instructional support. And I like to think of them as a pyramid, and all 3 sides are equally important. The emotional support is really helping children to develop that warm, supportive relationship with children, and also amongst each other. So you have that community and that family in your classroom, that joy of learning. And how children manage their time, attention, and behavior is really focused in on the classroom organization domain of one of our 3 domains in the class tool. Also, utilizing high quality learning formats is included in the classroom organization domain. And then the domain that we're going to be talking about today is the instructional support domain. This is how we provide opportunities for children to express their existing skills, to connect with their existing skills and knowledge, and then also how we scaffold more complex thinking skills, language skills, and developmental skills into their work as they're going through their lessons and activities. So we're going to think about 3 different dimensions within the instructional support domain. So this is how teachers help children to learn to solve problems, reason, and think. That's what we're going to be talking about with our concept development dimension. How we use feedback to expand and deepen skills and knowledge. That's our quality of feedback dimension. And then our 3rd dimension we're going to talk about today in the instructional support domain is language modeling, how we help to develop more complex language skills. If you happen to have, if you've ever gone through a training, observation training, and you have a class manual, I encourage you to take notes in it and to look at it as a reference tool as we go through. If you happen to have a K-3 dimension guide, definitely look at those. If you don't have them yet, I encourage you to attend trainings where you'll be able to receive those materials, or ask to and see if maybe you have some in your organization that you can use. And then also specifically for this training, we do have a flyer with the class handout with the class framework that available to you to be able to utilize. And I am definitely sending you copies of these slides so you can have all of those on hand. And you don't have to worry about trying to transcribe what you see on the slide. And yes, I definitely see that, of course, a lot of your materials are at school. So I'm glad to know that you have it available later to be able to look at. So let's dive into instructional support and learn more about it. And as you can see on this slide, this is why instructional support is so important, right? I'm sure many of you are very familiar with the fact that nationwide, in our studies of over 1,000 classrooms, which is shown in this slide here, emotional support is taking the lead in being the most high quality domain. How teachers are really supporting children in their emotional space and enjoying classroom, feeling connected, supported in the classroom, and having some opportunities for autonomy and independence. That's all connected in emotional support. And across the board, our teachers are doing really, really well with this particular domain. Another domain that teachers are doing quite well with is classroom organization. Again, that's how teachers support children in managing their time, attention, and behavior in the classroom. Across the nation, and actually even internationally, the domain that we need the most support and assistance on is instructional support. How do we really help children to do the thinking in the classroom? How can we push that cognitive load onto the students in a way that they are supported and help to be able to get further with the teacher support than they can on their own on a consistent basis, and also how we really support children in very meaningful language development throughout the day. Those are all things we're going to talk about instructional support on, and as you can see, it's definitely an area of need. Instructional support considerations, when you're moving from that low end, which is what the national average is at that lower end, to the mid effectiveness to highly effective instructionally supportive classrooms, we're really looking at the depth, duration, and frequency of these interactions. So it's not enough just to do these interactions once or twice, or to only do them maybe when you're doing a science lesson, right? These are something that we want, as we go through today, I want you to think about how you can start to incorporate instructional support interactions all day, every day, all day long, regardless of the type of academic subject you're teaching or the time of day. There's always opportunities to spark kids thinking and to support them in the moment with that thinking and developing understanding and really getting them talking and developing their language use. So it's all about that depth, how effective it is, really the impact on the children, right? Looking at the children will always tell us about the quality of that interaction. The duration, how long did that duration happen for, that particular interaction? And frequency is how often does it occur? Or I also think about how many students did it impact? So in everything that we're talking about today, I want you to recognize when you're already doing that and really own that fact that you're already doing so many of these interactions on a daily basis. And I encourage you to think about how you can do them better, higher impact, higher quality. How can you do them even longer, right? And instead of just being a couple seconds, maybe it could be a couple minutes to really sustained ongoing language learning conversations. And then also how you can do it more often with more students. So let's recognize your skills and let's build on your skills as we go through today. So the first dimension we're going to talk about is concept development. So a quick overview of concept development is this is really the dimension all about getting kids to think, right? Who's doing the thinking in the classroom and how can we push that cognitive load onto our students more often so our students are really the ones grappling with how and why things work, right? That's analysis and reasoning. It's also having kids grapple with, predictions, why they think something's going to happen and be able to explain their prediction. It's also how we help kids to be able to, really think through classifying and comparing things, not at that rote level of just doing it the way we've told them to do it, but have them, have a pile of buttons and say, what kind of groups could you put these into? Tell me why you've chosen to put them into those different groups. What was similar or different about them? And really have the kids be the ones to develop these constructs. And also evaluating within analysis and reasoning is evaluating how something went. So how did your experiment go today? Why do you think it went well, or why didn't you think it went well? Have them really be able to evaluate and think things through. Creating is another word for inventing, right? The invention process. How often do we have our children really going through the invention process where they are brainstorming all the possibilities of what something could be or what they could do, right? Then having them actually plan through how they could make something happen and then have them actually produce it. And to go through that process in our classroom is so invaluable to the students. It's part of that problem solving process, right? And then integration is really mindfully integrating children's prior knowledge with what we're working on right now. That helps them to be more prepared to take anything that's coming in and store it in their long-term memory. So that they can have that information come in and they can already be creating those synapses. So it's getting the children thinking about what they already know about a subject before we even start talking about the what or the how of the subject. Let's first find out what do they already know about it, and let's start building those connections. Another way to build connections is through applying what they're learning in the classroom to their real world. Always kind of think about the so what, right? So we're learning about this in our classroom. So what? What does it mean to me as a student? How am I going to use this in my real world? And I call that building a bridge. And you can build the bridge and have the kids walk over and have them think about how they could utilize this in their real world, or you can share how you use it in your real world. But this is how we make learning meaningful and usable to students, and applicable to a wide variety of times and subjects and types of situations. And that's super important for our children today, because we don't know what the world is going to look like when they graduate from high school or college, right? The world is changing so much. They don't need rote knowledge that's only applicable in one specific situation. They need usable knowledge that they could apply to any situation, and they need to know how to think. That needs to be a skill, and that is what concept development is all about. Some key points of concept development: it's not about a particular concept or subject. It is about it's what they can think about, and they can think. We can inspire them to think any subject, right? Anytime during the day. So really move out of thinking it's just math or just science. This is across the day, every day, all day. Focus on understanding and the learning process. So we're more focused on what the kids are learning and how they're learning, how they're going through that process, than the correct answer that they come up with. If they get a correct answer, that's amazing. We want to know how they got that correct answer. Intentional use of strategies to promote children's higher order thinking throughout the day and across subjects. So I really encourage you to think about how you can infuse more opportunity for kids to do the thinking throughout your day and throughout your curriculum. You have a wonderful curriculum. How can you infuse opportunities for kids to really be doing the thinking during those learning moments, and in transitions, and during your routines, and the beginning of the day and end of the day? How can you infuse the learning and thinking into those moments? And then also, how can you really have those sustained back and forth learning discussions that promote real thought, connections, and exploration of concepts? We're going to watch a quick video. And in this video, I'd like you to specifically watch for how the teacher is stimulating this little boy is writing a story. So he's going through that creation, that invention process, right? So how is the teacher stimulating the child's creativity as he plans to write his book? And also think about how she encourages the child to think about his real world audience, making that real world connection, thinking about his readers. And then as you're also watching, we also always want to think about the child, the impact on the child. So my question about the impact on this child is, how do you know this child is thinking critically? What are some things this child's doing to help you to know that in this moment, this child's thinking critically? All right, so we're going to watch the video. It's only like 1 or 2 minutes long, and then we'll come back. And I'd love to have some of your thoughts on these questions, and you can just type them into the chat box. Here we go.
Okay. So this is going to be at the end, kind of like an index. I'm going to have how to have fun swimming. At the end, and I'll have all about the diagram, and all about what? And all about like swimming, how like it came out, and then how the sport came out. So kind of like
the history.
Yeah, history of swimming. Okay. And then I'm gonna have the diagram. Then I'm gonna have all the strokes, how to do all the strokes.
Okay. Well, let's look at this. Okay, so you have your topic, how to have fun swimming, all about swim page, which I think is good. Do you think you might have to do a little bit of research on this one? Okay, cool. All right, because that seems like, and I don't know a lot about the history of swimming, so I look forward to learning a lot from you about that. We have the diagram of
kind of, I was thinking of the pool,
okay.
Like how the lane pool.
Okay. So then we have a breaststroke, butterfly, backstroke, freestyle. Huh.
And then at the beginning, you want to say, warning, freestyle is not anything you want to do.
So you have a disclaimer. All right. So now, what these pages, your different strokes, how are these pages going to be? Are they just going to be?
So like, have you ever seen one of those books like Soccer in the Library? It's kind of going to be like freestyle, and I'm going to say first you lay on your stomach.
So they're going.
You start moving your arms forward.
Mm-hmm.
Then you start kicking.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll get it. Oh, I'm going to do a type of index.
Oh, okay. Oh, I like
extra. I'm going to do extra.
Okay. So I have a question. So it sounds like your thought where you're going on with these books are kind of like how-to pages, like how to do the breaststroke? Is that okay? So these are kind of, and that's fine. They're going to be kind of how-to. So that's awesome. I have a question though. One thing that I want to know more about that I don't see here is, okay, so we swim for fun, but what do we do once we learn all these things? Do we just swim in the pool, or do we compete? Are there events that I can go to?
Oh, you want me to like list the events?
I didn't say that. I'm just asking. Like once I learn how to do all these, what if I want to show people? What do I do?
You can get competitive in the sport and join a team.
Oh, so you see how your book is making me want to know more? All right, so as you're writing, I hope you also think about, I want you to think about Miss L, okay? I just learned about swimming this year from you and some other kids in the class, students in the class. So I want you to pretend like you're writing this book for someone who has no earthly idea about swimming.
No, this is going to be my first book. I'm making 2 books this year. Then my second book.
Okay, so as he goes on to talk about his second,
what are some things you noticed in this video, how the teacher really stimulated the child's thinking, okay, as he was planning to write this book, how she got him thinking about his real world audience, the readers and their perspective, how to support them in learning more about swimming? And then how do you know the child was thinking critically? Just choose one of those and just type in your answer to any one of those 3 questions. I just would love to hear what you're thinking. So she prompted him with open-ended questions. Those are great questions, get kids thinking. Yep, there was that real world audience where she was saying, well, think about Miss L. I don't know anything about swimming. What could I do with it? Getting him to think about that. What are some other things? How do we know that he was thinking critically? She was asking guiding questions, which allowed the students to articulate his plan. Absolutely. She was acting as if she was in the role of the reader, and helping him think through what a reader might need to know. Absolutely. And she was letting him be the guide of that plan, right? She was just on the side facilitating him and thinking about it, but she was really making sure that this was his plan. Yeah, and he had that plan for the second part. He was moving on. Absolutely. And he was thinking about this in terms of a finished product. He was really trying to decide what it was he was going to do. And then the thinking will continue, right, when he goes to produce this book. And that'll also be a great thinking opportunity. Oops. And now I'd like you guys to think, oops, there we go. For yourselves, I don't have time, unfortunately, in this hour webinar to go through and really connect it to your curriculum, which I would love to do. But so what I did is I kind of came up with these generic scenarios and just have you think through how you would apply concept development into this type of scenario. And as we're doing this, just think more globally of how you can plan to include concept development into any lesson, any activity, any time of your day. So our specific scenario is you're planning to introduce a unit on the plant life cycles and want to focus on building usable knowledge rather than on rote knowledge. How can we really make it usable and meaningful for the children? So I'm going to list some questions, and I would just like you guys to just choose one of these questions and type in your thoughts. So what kinds of how and why questions could you ask about life cycles, right? How and why do life cycles work? Really getting the kids to think that through. How could you encourage children to brainstorm, plan, or produce their own ideas about life cycles? You know, maybe they could create their own plant and then decide, and then make a diagram of what that life cycle would look like for that imaginary plant that they're making. In what ways might you connect the plant life cycles to something the children already know? Maybe the children have already learned about the butterfly life cycle. How could you connect and bring up that prior knowledge and really support what they're learning with what they already know? And then in what ways might you connect lessons on life cycles in the classroom to the children's lives outside of school? Maybe the children have a garden at home or have planted a plant, or even have the kids think about the human life cycle. Maybe they have younger siblings and a grandparent at home, right? And have them think through that. So I would love to hear your thoughts. Does anyone have an idea? Just type it in right now. Just kind of generate an idea of what's one of these things that you think you might be able to do. And this process will help you be thinking through how to inspire concept development and infuse it into your different curriculum activities and lessons. Yes, we could connect the caterpillars and butterfly life cycles that they might have learned about the year prior. Mhm. How do we get strawberries, right? Where do strawberries come from? Let's think about that life cycle of a strawberry plant. Absolutely. Maybe find out what are some of their favorite fruits and vegetables. And then, you know what? Let's dive in. Let's go to the library. Let's look on the internet and find out about the life cycle of that plant. Yeah, what happens if you remove an insect from the life cycle? Ooh, now that is really getting into some deep thinking, right? And excellent thoughts. And then maybe you have a book on that you could read about to find the answers. So I just encourage you to play with it, play with concept development. Don't let this be anything that seems too challenging or too difficult. Just think about, how can I get my kids to think more about what we're working on, and just start asking questions and be curious. If you're curious about it, be curious with them. And I wonder statements are wonderful to get kids curious and their curiosity going. Have a display of some of the same plants in different stages. Our science curriculum actually has students plant seeds, yes, and go through the process. So think about, as the children are planting the seeds and going through the process, how can you add to the curriculum? How can you and plan to ask those types of questions so that your kids really are thinking about this? How can you add in an opportunity for them to be creative with what they're learning about the plant process? How can you add in opportunities to really think through, what might my children already know? What have they learned in years past? What have they learned from life experiences? How can I bring that into my classroom so this plant life cycle study comes alive for my children? Excellent thoughts and ideas. So I encourage you to keep thinking those through. Now we're going to build with quality of feedback. Quality of feedback is how teachers are there in the moment to moment with students, so that when they're grappling with these higher order thinking questions and these opportunities to really have cognitive challenges, we don't want them to get frustrated, right? Because frustrated learners are not learning. So how can we be there in the moment to support them in that process of learning, which can sometimes be so messy and ridden with failures, right? So how can we really support children in our focus on their developing a deeper understanding of the content they're working on, not just a shallow understanding, not just how to get the right answer, but we really want to make sure they understand what it means, what the concept of three means, and what it means to be a three of something, instead of just being able to recognize the number three and say it's a three, right? Really understanding the concepts of shapes and how shapes work in our world, rather than just being able to identify shapes on a page. So really, how do we deepen that understanding? And also, how do we support our kids in being persistent and going through this learning process, which I said also can be challenging and messy? And how do we just encourage our children to keep up that effort? Quality of feedback is how we do that. Quality of feedback is how we support kids to get it to a deeper level, to go to that next step than they could have on their own. They need us in these moments to really support their learning and development. So what can we do? We can scaffold, which is providing hints and assistance so kids can arrive at the correct answers on their own, so they can finish those activities on their own. We just provide either that verbal hint or that physical assistance so that they can do it on as independently as possible. Feedback loops are those really deep learning conversations that we have with children, or with a group of children, or with just one child, that really are learning conversations, really getting to the heart of understanding at a deeper level. Prompting thought process is how we support metacognition, thinking about thinking. This is us asking questions based on what a child just did or said that told us that they're thinking about something. Maybe a child says, "Oh, I know the answer," and says it, and then we're like, "That's right. How did you know that was the answer? What did you go through? Tell me what you thought about to get to that correct answer, because that's amazing," right? Really having kids verbalize their thought process, or if they did an act, or they did something, maybe they're like looked at something, tried to figure it out, and then they were able to fix the model that they were working on. Say, "How did you know that putting that piece right there would make it work? Tell me what you were thinking about." Getting kids to verbalize their thoughts, prompting thought process, is metacognition. They're going to need that skill in life. So that's a really wonderful thing to do. Ask kids those how do you know? Why do you think that? Types of questions. Providing information. This is when we are providing clarification or expanding on maybe a correct answer or clarifying if it's an incorrect answer, really how we're providing that information to students in the moment to, again, help them better understand. And then encouragement and affirmation. This is more than just cheerleading. This is more than just saying, great job, good luck. This is really encouraging effort, because effort is what we want to have the kids keep doing, right? Right now and tomorrow and every day. So think about the encouragement and affirmation you provide to children. How much of it is in the moment when they're working on it and encouraging that effort? And I can tell this is going to be such a beautiful picture when you're done, because you are really working so hard on it. Can't wait to see when you're finished, right? Encouraging that effort instead of only encouraging the product when they're done. Effort is what's going to keep the child learning and doing, and that's what we want to really focus our time and attention on as educators, is encouraging that effort. And being specific, let kids know exactly what it is that you appreciate, that you want to see them continue to do. So some key points for quality of feedback. It's in response to something children say or do. So quality of feedback is always right there in the moment. It is live, it is happening now. It's in response to what the kids say or do. Sustained back and forth exchanges, those learning exchanges, need to be of sufficient duration and depth to get the kids to better understand, but there's no like certain number, no strive for 5 or anything like that. It doesn't matter how many times it goes back and forth. We just say, did it go back and forth enough so that the child developed that deeper understanding? Did it work for the child? Yes. Then maybe it was a short one, or maybe it was a long one, maybe middle length. However long it needed to be for that child to better understand that concept or that idea or what they were working on. Focus on increasing understanding and persistence in the moment. That's really where that the encouragement and affirmation come in, right? Really keeping the kids persisting in the moment and deepening that understanding through those conversations we're having. And it's about getting the child to verbalize their thought process, which is that metacognition. Tell me why you said that. How do you know that? And getting them to think that through as well. We're going to watch a video so you can see it in action. So in this video, it's a whole group, and they're doing an activity. And I want you to notice how the teacher engages a child in a back and forth exchange in response to her correct answer. It's just as important to have those learning conversations based on correct answers as it is to incorrect answer. So how did our teacher really do that? And how did she also affirm the child's use of a successful strategy to be able to come up with an answer during whole group about a calendar math question? And then, of course, I want you to be focusing on the children. So the impact question I have for you is, how did the teacher's expansion on children's answers help facilitate their learning, help facilitate that little girl's learning, and actually the learning of all the children in the room by hearing her talk about how she got her answer and hearing the teacher's expansion on that strategy. So let's listen real quick, be thinking about these look-fors, and we'll talk about them when we get back.
Very quickly, yesterday was the 113th day of school. What, pray tell, is today's day of school, Aiden?
114.
Thank you, because we do have that tens rod. In how many days can we bundle our ones? It's the 114th day. So in how many days can I bundle those? 6 days. How'd you figure that out?
Because I thought 4 or 5 plus 5 equals 10. So I just said, you don't have 5 there, it could be 6.
Awesome strategy. I know my doubles. I know 5 and 5. Well, 4 and 6, those 1 off from doubles. That's another strategy. And sometimes remember how when we practice our facts long enough, those 4 plus 6 just meld in our brain.
So that was a quick one. So
Video, I'd love to hear some thoughts in the chat of one of these 3 questions on the screen. How did the teacher engage in back and forth exchange in response to the child's correct answer? How did the teacher affirm the child's successful strategy? Or that impact on the children? How did the teacher's expansion on children's answers help facilitate their learning in the moment? I'd love to hear your thoughts about this video. What can we learn from this video about quality of feedback? The teacher confirmed that the student's strategy of using the doubles to get to 4 + 6, that's right. And she found out that strategy from the little girl, right? Think of all the learning that could have been missed if the little girl just said, 6 days, and the teacher says, you're right, moving on, right? Some of the children in the room would not have known, how did she get to 6, right? And then it was wonderful that the little girl got to be empowered to be the one to express to everybody how she got to 6. And that was metacognition, right? She was explaining her thinking. We have, oh yeah, so sorry about the losing the feed during the video. Sometimes that happens with the internet. I apologize. But the little girl said that you can get to. She knew she was going to bundle in 6 days, and then the teacher asked the little girl to explain her thinking. Basically, how did you know that? And she explained to everybody, and then the teacher went on to confirm that and expand upon that, saying, yes, your doubles, 5 + 5, and 4 is just one off from that, so it could be 4 + 6. And so this is how quality feedback can really support learning in the moment with an individual child and also with groups. And I ask you to think about for yourselves another one of our scenarios that I have in place here. Again, it's a specific scenario, but I encourage you to think generally about how you can really plan to provide that in the moment support for children in developing their understanding and their persistence. So you're wrapping up a lesson on 3D shapes, let's say. You ask the children to mold clay into specific shapes as you call them out by name. Children eagerly show you their shapes as you walk around. So now let's imagine you're walking around, you're seeing these shapes, you call out cube or you call out pyramid, and kids are molding them. So the first thought for quality of feedback is, what kind of hints can you provide when children don't mold the correct shape? Instead of saying, no, that's wrong, right? How could you give a hint so that the child, or let me do it for you? How could you give a hint so the child can do that on their own? Maybe remind them to look at the chart, the shape chart, or to look, look at your neighbor, to know how to make that sphere. What questions could you ask to get children to explain their thinking, right? So if a child's made it, what kind of question could you ask to get a child to verbalize their thought process on that particular 3D shape? What additional information could you provide to expand on children's understanding? Right? How could you elaborate on a correct answer or clarify on an incorrect shape so that the kids are really understanding what they're doing and not just mindlessly making shapes? And then also, how could you recognize and encourage children's efforts during this process as they work on molding the various shapes? And give some real life examples, right, of cubes and spheres. Absolutely, have them think through, the globe and our Earth for a sphere, right? And maybe you might even have like a little cube seat in your classroom that you could think about, or dice, right? Definitely, those real world examples are excellent. If it's a cube, you could say a face is the square, right? So one of the faces is a square. Now, can you have it go 3D? Absolutely. Count the sides. Excellent. How do you know it was a cube? The question, how do you know it's a cube, is metacognition. That's the prompting thought process, getting the child to verbalize their thinking. And that's so much more valuable than saying, yes, high five, great job, right? How do you know that's a circle? How do you know that's a cube? How do you know? Can you tell the room how you know that's a sphere and not just a circle, right? Let kids be the ones to really explain these things and then provide additional feedback for the class based on their thoughts. I love the way you started to make a ball for your sphere. That seems like excellent support of a child's effort. And your kids are going to keep working when you provide that kind of effort support. So thank you very much for writing those in. You guys are really on the right track. Now let's add in our third and final dimension for the domain of instructional support. So now let's look specifically at language modeling. Language modeling at its heart is getting the kids to talk, right? Some of you are like, my kids talk all day long. I don't need help getting them to talk. But this is really having kids learn how to express themselves, use words and vocabulary and sentence structure to express their thoughts and ideas. This is going to be so critical for them as learners, right? How do we help support children's development of language use, especially in these critical K through 2 years? Um, some ways that we do that is definitely by engaging them in conversation, right? It's practice. Conversation is practice for utilizing language. So how can we engage them more often in conversation? How can we ensure that our lessons and activities have opportunities for conversations infused into them? And it's not just what the kid, it's not just that background chatter while the kids are working, but how can we actually have them intentionally conversing during our lessons and activities, rather than the silence is golden. Sometimes there's definitely a place for silence, but how can we make the conversations meaningful and usable towards supporting the learning that's happening? And part of frequent conversation is peer conversations, right? It's so exciting when we can infuse peer conversations into children's opportunities to talk. So how can you think throughout your day to have multiple opportunities where you're really encouraging peers to talk to each other? Maybe that's in group work. Maybe it's in think, pair, shares. However you choose to do it, think through the valuable importance of kids talking to each other, especially in these academic conversations. Open-ended questions. Open-ended questions are literally an invitation for children to respond with more than 1 or 2 word answers. The reason why these work so well for language modeling, and also you remember we mentioned them for concept development, is because they encourage children to provide their thoughts, right? So open-ended questions don't always have to end with a question mark. It can be, how do you know? It can be, tell me more, or I wonder statements, right? So think through the types of questions you're asking your kids and the ways in which you're hoping for them to respond. If you're only getting a 1-word answer, maybe you should reword your question so you can really get to the heart of their thoughts and ideas. Repetition and extension is not repeating ourselves, but repeating the children's words. And this is an important component of children feeling like they are valuable conversational partners. We want to hear what they have to say. We are actively listening. This is active listening, right? We're active listening to what they are saying so much that we are valuing their contribution by repeating it and extending and elaborating on it. It's such a valuable way to get kids talking more, or anybody for that matter, whether you're working with adults or older children. Repeat what they say and ask follow-up questions, and they'll tend to talk to you more often. Self and parallel talk makes language, which is very abstract, concrete. At our heart, we are all concrete learners. So how can we make language more concrete, especially for our language learners in our classrooms? We use self and parallel talk. We map words to actions. So while the teacher is putting items into the water to see if they sink or float, the teacher will narrate their actions. Oh, I'm going to, which one of these am I going to pick up? I'm going to pick up this big heavy log because I think it's going to definitely sink. Let me see what happens when I put it in the water. So just narrate your actions so it makes it concrete and come alive. Also, the same as with parallel talk. That is a teacher who is narrating, kind of sportscasting children's actions. Oh, I see that Lucy is trying to decide what item she's going to put in the water. She's picked up a very light penny. So Lucy, do you think that's going to sink or float? Right? So it's sportscasting children's activities as well, which is actually a really wonderful way to keep everybody engaged and focused during a lesson, but it also makes the language modeling occur because it supports making language more concrete and approachable, learnable. And then we have advanced language. It's not just the teacher throwing, $10 words at the kids all day long, but it's making sure that the teacher is utilizing rich vocabulary, rich sentence structure, right? And also introducing new words into daily conversations. Where do most of our new words, especially in K2 classrooms, come from? Books that we read. So think about the books that you're reading, the vocabulary that's being introduced in it, and then think about ways that you can intentionally utilize those words the rest of the day, the rest of the week, the rest of the month. How do you know when kids have truly owned and developed those new words? Is when they start to use them independently in correct ways in their own vocabulary. So I encourage you to think about the words that are being introduced in your stories. Make sure that you pause and connect it to words that they already know, connect it to the images that they're seeing in the book, if it's a picture book, to help support their understanding of that word, the context it's used in, and then also connect it to familiar words, familiar ideas that they know, and then try to use those words often. That's how we really develop language in our classrooms. Some key points, like I said, open-ended questions include tell me about and I wonder. They don't all end with a question mark, but they invite more than a 1 or 2 word response. Self and parallel talk has to be used at the same time as action to make it concrete and come alive, and for children to be able to see those words happen. And then conversations in language modeling focus on promoting and increasing children's use of language. These aren't always academic conversations, right? They could be social conversations. They could be conversations about things that the children already know, and it's not a learning conversation. They could be conversations about what's going to, what do you think is going to be for lunch? These are conversations where children are using language and a teacher is intentionally supporting children in utilizing their language skills. We're going to watch a video on language modeling. And in this video, we have, this is our first grade. The other 2 were second grade videos. This is a first grade teacher clearly at a reading table. And the children come across a couple words that they don't know. So I encourage you to watch for how the teacher explains how the word bank is used in the passage, and then also engages the children in a conversation about the meaning of the word crept, which is definitely a new word for these boys. And then I encourage you to think about the impact on these children's learning. How does the teacher promote language development in this moment while they're reading passages? So be thinking about these as you watch, and we'll talk in a moment.
The rain came down all day and all night. It came down for so long that the river flooded over backs. Banks, you're right. Now, it doesn't mean like a bank of where you keep your money. A bank is something when the water comes up over the banks, because there's kind of like a little hill that goes down to the river, and the river water gets higher, and it goes up over the side of the river. That's the bank. Right there. Yeah, you do live on a bank. I've been to your house. Let's see. Water crept through the streets. It crept. Say that word. Crept. What does the word crept mean? Crept. The water crept. Means it moved, but it kind of sneaky. It was sneaky how it kept going through the street. It crept. Oftentimes the street is no, if the street was here and the water was sitting on top of the street, and then more of it on top of the street, and more of it on top of the street. So you couldn't see. Yes, you're right. So you couldn't see the streets anymore. It crept. It moved. It crept up and up. So if it means it crept up and up, what was the water doing? Was it getting deeper or more shallow? Deeper. It's getting deeper. That's right.
So what notice our teacher doing to explain these words so that they are usable and understandable to the children? And then also how our teacher in general was able to impact the children's language development during this moment. So what was the impact on the children's language development as well? I'd love to hear your thoughts. So we have lots of them coming in quickly. So it grew their understanding that words can have multiple meanings, right? Because she made a mention of that, like a bank. She first initially started talking about it as a bank that they go to, because that's probably what they're more familiar with, and then explained that there's another meaning for this word. She allowed them to give the definition first and then guided them to the correct definition Absolutely. She wanted to find out what they already knew about it, right? Where their thinking is. So then she could provide that feedback. That's that quality feedback as well. Again, real life connections. Yep, the boy lives on the bank, and he was the one who said, oh, I have a bank. You do have a bank, right? So he was making those connections. The teacher asked questions to build upon their prior knowledge by finding out what they already know about it, what they think the word means. She didn't give the answer. That's right. Because what in this language modeling moment, she was really using a lot of quality of feedback, which is getting the children to the answer on their own. She was letting the students take the lead while reading, real life connections, and she was giving them time to think. Ooh, we also had some concept development. See how this all just really melds together? Our teacher is being very intentional about using this opportunity to get the kids thinking about words and what they mean. She said that one of the boys lived on the bank and she guided them to that correct answer. Absolutely. So our kids were really thinking about these words. And she continued to use the word crept many times because she knew that that was a less familiar word for them. And hopefully it'd be exciting if she continues to use the word crept throughout the day for several days and weeks to come until it becomes part of the children's vernacular. And that's when you really know children have understood and now have added that word to their vocabulary. So let's think about, again, kind of a general situation that I came up with, a scenario for language modeling. But as we go through this, definitely be thinking through how you can start to intentionally infuse language modeling strategies, and everything in your framework is a strategy. Everything in the class dimension, the behavior markers, the indicators, they're all behaviors, teacher behaviors and student behaviors, right? It's all strategies. So think about the strategies that you can now start to infuse into your moments, your learning moments in your classroom, to really increase the language development opportunities that you have. Opportunities that are specifically listed in your curriculum, and then opportunities that you can sprinkle in and increase throughout the day. So here's an idea. You're reading a book aloud and pause to engage children in a conversation about what is happening in the story. So let's think through, how can you facilitate meaningful peer conversations about the story? What's the best way to increase language development in your classroom? Peer conversations, because then everyone's talking, not just the two kids who get to answer the question, whole group, right? When you're a whole group, how can you infuse peer conversations and that opportunity so that everyone can do the talking and thinking about what their answers are and get to express it and get some feedback from somebody? What are some open-ended questions you could ask about the story? What are some generic open-ended questions you guys have on stories that children might respond to with more than a one-word response? How would it sound like to extend and elaborate on children's comments? How could you prepare? How could you plan to intentionally want to extend and elaborate on children's comments? You don't know what their comments are yet. What are some like sentence starters and stop kind of things that you could have that would help you to be able to do that? And yes, you're right. And talk more about what they've said. How might you plan to connect new vocabulary words with familiar words and concepts? Okay, that's how you can get the most out of the words that are utilized in the books. Connecting to the image or the context in the story, and then thinking about just like she said, so what do we know about crept? She could continue on with crept about, does that make you think about like a ghost or Halloween or different animals, how they creep, and connecting that to that familiar concept. So what are some thoughts for language modeling? So what might happen next in the story? That's prediction question as well. So see, now you're infusing language modeling, but you are bringing in concept development for prediction. And I would encourage you, if they say what's going to happen next, don't just stop there. How do you know? What makes you think that, right? Add in some prompting thought process from quality of feedback. And then you've got ding, 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 something happening from all the dimensions in instructional support. Excellent. Think through the best times, because sometimes are even better times to ask those questions. Think through when's the best time to ask those questions. I always go through my story first, read through it, and put my sticky notes where it's like a cliffhanger, and this is going to be where I'm going to get the best thoughts from kids about what happened next. That's when I want to ask that question. Have a think, pair, share about an illustration in the story. Absolutely. Maybe even before you start. So turn to a partner. what do you think is going to happen in this story? What do you think this story is going to be about based on the cover picture? Right? Have them talk for a minute. All you have to do is get a routine going where kids talk for a minute or two and then come back. Once you establish that routine, my goodness, you can drop that routine into any time of day, those turn and talks, and really infuse language development into your classroom on a more consistent and regular basis. It's an excellent way to get kids involved and interested in lessons. If you're one of the characters in the text, what would you do next? This is not only amazing because kids will have a fun time answering it, but it's also concept development. It's creating, right? So now you're taking something the kids are doing in the classroom and you're thinking intentionally, how can I put a creative spin on this? How can I get the kids to really think about and create something new in this moment? That's right. What would you do next in the story? Excellent, excellent questions, you guys. Really good the way you're thinking this through. And I encourage you to continue doing that. Promoting instructional support, think through intentionally. Intentional planning is so important when we're starting something new. So think about how you can intentionally plan the how. Remember, interactions in class is all about how. It's not the what. The what is your curriculum. And sometimes we don't have a lot of choices in the what, right? We don't have a lot of choices in our curriculum, but you get to choose how. You get to choose. There is flexibility within your facilitation. I know, even in scripted curriculum, there's flexibility. Find your flexibility and think about how you're going to create opportunities for children to think critically in this moment. Develop an understanding, a deeper understanding, and utilize language in this moment during the lesson. Think that through, incorporate that into your lesson planning. Plan how to explicitly build connections between previous knowledge and current content. So previous feedback that you've provided and current feedback, and previous conversations and this current conversation. How can you build connections throughout your day? Remember what we were talking about this morning? Well, now we can look at it, right? Remember what we did last week or last month or last year, right? Really be thinking how you can build those connections, and also connections to what they know in their real life. And then plan how to apply multiple instructional support strategies into your facilitation of daily curriculum, lessons, and activities. Like you were just saying, some of those questions you were asking about the book were sparking concept development questions as well. And so, and then if you say, how do you know, then you're also including quality of feedback. So just be thinking through how you can infuse not just one dimension. One dimension is great, but maybe even multiple dimensions into a single moment, a single strategy in your classroom. It's all about the impact on child outcomes, and our intentional teachers, teachers who are making intentional choices during interactions are really, truly making a difference for the children that they work with. And so be thinking about how you choose to interact with children every day, before, during, and after lessons and activities. And that's really what matters. It's the how you're interacting with children throughout the day to support their learning. I am at the end, but I also know that we only have 3 more minutes, so I'm going to invite Brandy to share any thoughts. I apologize that we really don't have time for questions.
Thanks, Mamie. These are great ways to think a little bit more about the how and really getting kids involved. This is definitely the place where we have started thinking about, and where we have really seen some things where we know that we need to work is definitely in instructional support from all the data that we've been getting from our pilot. So I think being more intentional and thinking and being able to help our teachers think through instructional support is definitely the way to go. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. And I encourage you to connect with each other. No teacher needs to be their own island, so definitely connect with other teachers who are trying to do these same similar things and find out how they're doing it, what works for them, and think about a time in your day when it's easiest for you to try to infuse some new, different types of intentional interactions into your classroom, and start there. Start when, so be kind to yourself. Start, if you want to start asking open-ended questions, think about a time in your day when the kids are the most free in talking with you and responding to your questions. Plan to start your process, your learning process, and your new application of a new skill and strategy in that moment when it's just going to be easier for you, you know, you're going to get some good responses from the kids. You're going to feel successful in this process. Your kids are going to get a little more comfortable with being asked these types of questions. And then you can always transition and start to leverage that skill you have now into different times of your day, increase how you're doing it, how often you're doing it, and the quality of which you're doing. So I encourage you to always be thinking about that. How can I do it better? How can I do it longer? How can I do it with even more students? Think about what you're already doing with instructional support right now this year. I know we just finished out the year, but think about what you've been doing already. What are some skills for instructional support you already have in your toolkit, and how you can improve on that? And then how you can start to add in new skills as you go. So thank you so much for your time and your attention. Please let Brandy know if you have questions, and I encourage you to always be thinking how you can provide just more opportunities for kids to think and talk and learn during lessons and activities throughout the day. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Brandy. Thank you, Mamie, for sharing your information with us. I just want to remind everybody to don't forget to do the eval in the Sketch app. And I appreciate everybody attending.
I did see one question that came through that I wanted to answer. Hopefully the person might be on. It was around, will class eventually take the place of Compass? So I just wanted to let you know that at this time, that is a district decision. And even the ones that are currently in the pilot, you can have your class score replace your Compass score if that's something that your district chooses. So if that's something that you're interested in, I definitely encourage you to talk to your administration within the district.
Thank you, Brandy. And also please remember that you can have copies of all the slides in your Schedule app. And also there's a little flyer on the class framework available to you as well. So definitely check that out.
And if you're interested in joining the class pilot and you're not in there, just please reach out to me and I can talk with you about that.